So when you get dressed in the morning, what is your outfit actually saying about your soul?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a big question, right? Because today we are looking at texts that literally caused wealthy Roman women to just like strip off their gold mid-worship.
That's true.
We are jumping into this deep dive on the ancient, highly controversial, and I think incredibly profound blueprints of Christian personal style.
Yeah, which is a wild concept for us today.
Right. I mean, it is so easy for you to think of clothes as just fabric,
Right.
just a functional necessity to keep out the cold, or maybe just a fun way to express a mood, or like your personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
But what if your aesthetic, the literal way you arrange your hair, the jewelry you put on your body, the labels you choose to wear, what if that is actually a profound theological statement?
Well, and it's a really tense question, honestly, because we live in a culture that treats fashion as this completely secular, highly individualized space.
Completely.
Like, we rarely, if ever, connect our closets to our theology.
No.
But if we look at the historical roots of Christian thought, specifically back in the first century, the way a person adorns themselves isn't just a matter of taste.
Right.
It is considered a direct, undeniable reflection of their deepest spiritual commitments. Like, your exterior is literally the billboard for your interior reality.
And that tension, that exact tension, is what we are leaning into today. We have a fascinating stack of sources in front of us.
We really do.
Yeah, featuring a rich, rigorous exegetical study of two foundational texts from the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be dissecting 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10.
The big ones.
The big ones.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to break down the historic Christian doctrine of personal adornment, right? We're going to translate the absolute genius of the original Greek into everyday concepts.
Which is so needed.
Yeah. And then we're going to figure out how these ancient, honestly radical instructions are meant to challenge your daily life, your worship, and your behavior today.
So I'll be guiding us through the systematic theology here, really digging into the historical, grammatical, and socioeconomic context from the source material.
Perfect.
Because to understand why these rules were written, I mean, you really have to understand the specific chaos these early church leaders were trying to navigate.
Right. And I am here to pull this right into the 21st century. I want to look at the psychology behind these texts and definitely push back on some of the cultural friction these verses cause.
Oh, and there's a lot of friction.
So much friction. And we'll figure out the practical mechanics of this. But before we can really evaluate this doctrine, we have to look at the raw materials, right?
We need the ingredients.
Exactly. We need to hear the actual words the apostles Peter and Paul used, and then we need to interrogate them. So let's start with Peter's letter.
Sounds good.
I'm going to read our first foundational text aloud. This is 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. And it starts, quote, "Wives, in the same way submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives.
Right.
Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate braided hair and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes.
There's the big prohibition.
Yeah. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight."
Such a powerful phrase.
It really is. "For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord.
Almost done.
You are her daughters, if you do what is right and do not give way to fear." End quote.
Okay, so to really grasp what Peter is doing here, we can't just rely on our modern English definitions of words like purity or gentle.
Right, because it means something totally different to us.
Exactly. The source material spends significant time defining a very specific Greek glossary that Peter is employing, and we have to start there.
Okay, so what's the first word we need to know?
The first crucial word here is hygnos. In our English translations, it just says purity, specifically referring to moral purity.
Okay.
But in the first century Greek mindset, hygnos is much broader and, frankly, more aggressive than just a passive lack of contamination.
Right, because when you and I hear purity today, we often think of something incredibly fragile,
Yes.
like a white dress that you can't get dirty, or maybe a glass of water that hasn't been tainted. It feels very passive.
Exactly. But hagnos actively includes the idea of rejecting evil in general.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a robust purity of life. It is the active daily decision to separate oneself from the moral decay of the surrounding pagan culture.
So it's a choice you make every day.
Right. And it's important to note that while Peter is addressing women in this specific context, this exact same quality of hagnos was demanded from all believers,
Male and female.
male and female, and especially church leaders throughout the rest of the New Testament. It is like the baseline moral operating system for a Christian.
Okay, so hagnos is an active, almost muscular rejection of moral compromise. What is the next piece of this framework?
So the next word of cosmos. Peter says, your beauty should not come from outward adornment. And the word for adornment there is cosmos.
Like the cosmos.
Yeah. We usually hear this and think of the universe, outer space, right? But the literal translation in Greek is arrangement or order.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is actually where we get the word cosmetics. By extension, it means adornment or beauty.
Because beauty, I guess, in the classical sense, is about bringing order to chaos. It's about how you arrange things.
Precisely.
Like if you walk into a room and furniture is just piled in the center, that's chaos. But if an interior designer comes in and purposefully arranges the sofa, the rug, the lighting,
Cosmos.
they have adorned the room by ordering it. Okay, that makes sense.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. And what is crucial here, doctrinally speaking, is that the word cosmos itself does not suggest there is anything intrinsically evil about adorning oneself.
Right.
Taking care of your appearance, arranging yourself neatly, is entirely appropriate. The theological issue Peter is raising is not whether you order your life, but what kind of order or arrangement you are prioritizing.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, are you obsessively arranging your exterior, or are you prioritizing the arrangement of your soul?
Which brings us to the two specific ways he wants the soul arranged.
Yeah.
Because he uses two words to describe the spirit, gentle and quiet.
Yes.
But again, I think our modern English baggage completely distorts what these words actually meant back then. So let's look at gentle first.
Right. So the Greek word is praeos. Now, in Greek literature, praeos has absolutely nothing to do with weakness or being a pushover.
Okay.
Praeos designates the absence of violence stemming from a deep, unshakable trust in God.
That is so different from our word gentle.
It really is. It describes someone who might be actively oppressed, marginalized, or poor, but who refuses to resort to manipulation or vengeance because they rely entirely on God to vindicate them.
You know, I've often heard praeos described using the analogy of a wild horse that has been broken and bridled.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it isn't that the horse has lost its power or its muscle, right? It is that the immense power is now under absolute control.
Yes,
It
exactly.
is power surrendered to a master. So it's the absolute opposite of arrogant pride or aggressive self-promotion.
Yeah, a praeos person has a tranquil demeanor. They are courteous. They don't instigate quarrels. They don't need to dominate the room.
Right.
And the source material actually emphasizes that this is the exact same gentle spirit that characterized Jesus Christ when he stood before his accusers.
Wow.
It is a towering strength that actively chooses not to strike back.
That really reframes the entire passage for me. It's a peaceful, highly disciplined strength. And that pairs directly with the final word in Peter's glossary, which is quiet.
Yeah, so the word is hesukios, and just like praeos, this is not a command to be mute.
Right. It doesn't mean stop talking.
Exactly. Hesukios designates an inner peacefulness and tranquility, especially in the midst of potential or real conflict.
Cool.
It is a profound psychological calmness produced by knowing you are totally at peace with God.
That's beautiful.
And the source material points out that the absence of this specific virtue, like the lack of hesukios, is what generates personal turmoil, anxiety, and social drama.
So if we synthesize Peter's blueprint here, he is asking for an active moral purity, which is hagnos.
Right.
He is cautioning against an obsessive, superficial arrangement of the physical body, the cosmos. And he is promoting a formidable, bridled strength, praeos, coupled with an unshakable inner tranquility, hesukios.
You got it.
That is a very specific, highly engineered psychological profile. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's shift over to the Apostle Paul,
Let's do it.
because he tackles this exact same issue, but from a completely different angle with a different vocabulary. I'll read our second foundational text, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10.
Go for it.
Quote, I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves, not with elaborate braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes,
there's the list again.
Yeah, exactly the same.
F.
But with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. End quote.
Okay, so Paul's approach to the theology of adornment uses some very nuanced language. His first key term here is katastol.
Katastol.
Yeah, and our English Bibles often just translate this as apparel or clothing, but its primary meaning in antiquity was much deeper than fabric.
Really?
Yeah, it refers to a person's demeanor or deportment. It is a disposition, like an inner posture, that then expresses itself visibly in your exterior appearance, your gait, and yes, your clothing.
Oh, wow.
It is the outward physical manifestation of an inward reality.
So the tastal is the idea that you cannot separate your physical presentation from your spiritual condition.
Exactly.
Like your clothes, your posture, your vibe,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, that is the visible billboard for your internal demeanor.
That's a great way to put it. And Paul says this katastol needs to be kosmios, which translates to respectable or honorable.
Okay.
In secular Greek culture at the time, a kosmios person is someone who is self-disciplined and well-mannered. It is someone regarded by the broader society as highly respectable.
Makes sense.
Paul is saying a believer's overall demeanor and their clothing should immediately command respect from anyone watching because of its obvious, disciplined, thoughtful nature.
Okay, and then Paul drops the hammer with two incredibly dense psychological words for modesty and decency.
Yes, he does.
These are words that modern culture really, really struggles with. Let's dissect them.
So the first one is eidos, which is usually translated as modesty, but we have to strip away centuries of cultural baggage here.
Please do.
To the Greeks, eidos wasn't just a ruler measuring the length of a hemline.
Right.
Eidos was defined as a respectful secret fear that one feels toward oneself.
A secret fear.
Yeah. It is a healthy sense of shame or pudor that keeps a person from excess. It is an internal moral boundary.
A secret fear of oneself. That is intense. Let's think about this mechanically. It reminds me of a governor on a high-performance engine.
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
Yeah, so a governor is a mechanical device that limits the maximum speed of an engine. It doesn't matter how hard you press the gas pedal, the governor physically prevents the engine from revving into a red line that would cause it to overheat and explode.
Okay, yeah.
Eidos is a spiritual governor. It is an internal standard of self-respect that stops you from commodifying yourself, from seeking excessive attention, or from acting in a way unworthy of your dignity,
Right?
even if absolutely no one else is watching the dashboard.
That is a brilliant way to operationalize the concept. It is the self-respect that prevents self-destruction through excess.
I love that.
And Paul pairs this internal governor with sophrosun, which is usually translated as sensibly or decency.
Sophrosun.
Yeah, this word literally means to be of a sound mind. It is self-control, but specifically it is the dominion of the mind and good judgment over lower, baser impulses.
Why did the Greeks place such an emphasis on the dominion over lower impulses?
Well, because classical philosophy recognized that humans are constantly pulled by appetites, right? For food, for sex, for attention, for status, for power.
Sure.
If those lower appetites are allowed to drive the chariot, the human life just crashes. Sophrosun is the rational mind firmly holding the reins.
Got it.
But in a Christian doctrinal setting, this virtue isn't just a matter of stoic willpower. It is the result of the Holy Spirit's sanctifying work in a believer's heart, teaching them to live a thoughtful, disciplined, intentionally restrained life.
Man, when you lay all these terms out on the table, Peter's and Paul's, it is staggering how much depth is here.
It's definitely not superficial.
No, we are not looking at arbitrary legalistic rules about what not to wear.
Yeah.
We are looking at the architectural blueprints for a stable human soul.
Exactly.
Like Peter and Paul are saying you need a foundation of hagnos, that active moral purity.
Mm-hmm.
The load-bearing walls holding everything up are preos and hysukios, that gentle, quiet, bridled strength. And the roof that protects it all from the elements is eidos and sophrosun, that internal engine governor of self-respect and the sound dominion of your mind over your craving for status.
That's a really solid summary.
If you build that architecture internally, the exterior, your katastol, the way you dress and present yourself, is naturally, effortlessly going to reflect that stable, peaceful structure.
Right. The exterior is simply the inevitable manifestation of the architectural soundness of the soul.
So good.
But to really understand why Peter and Paul were handing out these specific blueprints, to understand the urgency in their letters, we have to look at the historical situation on the ground.
Right.
Why were they suddenly talking about women's clothing and jewelry in the first place?
Because context is everything. If we just read this in a vacuum today, it sounds bizarre. Let's look at Peter's context first. He is writing to people in their homes, correct?
Yes. Peter's context is primarily domestic. He is specifically addressing believers who are living in a hostile pagan society in the Roman Empire. He is writing to Christian wives who are married to non-Christian husbands. And we have to understand that in the Greco-Roman world, the household was not a democracy.
Right.
It was an absolute hierarchy ruled by the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. It was highly unusual and frankly politically and socially dangerous for a wife to adopt a different religion than her husband.
Because Roman religion was deeply tied to the household gods and the state, right?
I agree.
If the wife suddenly stops offering incense to the family gods because she has become a Christian, the husband wouldn't just see that as a personal difference of opinion.
Not at all.
He would see it as an act of treason against the family and a disruption of the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods.
Exactly right. Society viewed it as a radical act of insubordination. So these women were in an incredibly vulnerable, legally precarious, and socially tense situation.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, they have found this new liberating faith in Christ, but their husbands hold all the legal and physical power and are still deeply embedded in the pagan culture.
And Peter's goal for these women in this literal powder keg situation is witnessing.
Yes.
He tells them their ultimate goal is to win over their unbelieving husbands to the gospel. But how?
Right, that's the question.
Not through constant theological debates, not through nagging, not through aggressive verbal conflict that would probably end in abuse or divorce, but through the undeniable reality of their transformed behavior.
Right. But here is where we need to address a massive point of cultural friction.
Okay, I'm glad you brought this up, because I had to push back here on behalf of anyone listening to this in the 21st century.
Please do.
When we hear Peter say things like, submit to your husbands and do this in fear, all the alarms go off.
Understandably.
Isn't this just ancient patriarchal society demanding that women be submissive, quiet, and literally afraid of the men in their lives? Isn't Peter just baptizing the oppressive cultural norms of the Roman Empire and calling it Christian doctrine?
That is the most common and honestly most understandable objection to this text.
Yeah.
But a rigorous theological and grammatical reading of the text proves that assumption entirely wrong. In fact, what Peter's is doing here is highly subversive.
Really? How so?
When Peter talks about the husbands observing the wife's pure behavior in fear, our modern minds immediately assume it means in fear of the husband's anger.
Right, obviously.
But the Greek text and the broader context of Peter's letter explicitly shows that this fear means reverence and absolute commitment to God, not fear of the human husband.
Okay, wait. I need you to prove that to me from the text, because that completely changes the narrative.
We can prove it by looking directly at verse 6. Peter holds up Sarah as an example, but then he explicitly commands these Christian women, do what is right and do not give way to fear.
Oh.
He literally, specifically commands them not to be terrified of their husbands or their society. If he wanted them cowering in fear of patriarchal authority, he wouldn't explicitly command them to be fearless toward humans.
Okay, so if she isn't afraid of the husband, how is this subversive? How does this undermine the patriarchy of the day?
By establishing an entirely new hierarchy where the woman's ultimate allegiance is to the Lord, not the paterfamilias.
Oh, wow.
Remember, in Roman society, the husband was the supreme religious authority of the household. By telling the woman to revere God above all and to base her entire behavioral code on her commitment to Christ rather than the dictates of her pagan husband, Peter is granting her profound, independent moral agency.
That is huge.
It is. Her pure behavior, her hagnos, arises out of her autonomous reverence to the God of the universe. She is choosing to submit to the structure of the marriage, not because she is a terrified, propertyless subordinate, but as a highly calculated strategy of love to win her husband's eternal soul to the gospel.
She has a mission.
Yes. Her soul belongs entirely to God, and no Roman law can touch it.
That is staggering. So the fear is actually a holy reverence for God that empowers her, that acts as a shield so she doesn't have to be afraid of the intense societal pressure or her husband's potential disapproval.
Exactly.
It completely flips the script. She is the one acting with quiet, strategic strength.
Yeah.
So that is the explosive dynamic of Peter's context, the Roman home. What about Paul? He is writing to Timothy regarding the church in Ephesus. His context is totally different, isn't it?
Very different. Paul's context is the public gathered church. First Timothy is a pastoral letter filled with instructions about proper worship practice, church governance, and communal behavior.
Right.
Paul's overarching desire, which he states earlier in chapter 2, is that the church would lead a quiet and peaceable life, godly and respectful in every way within the broader society. He wants the church to be a beacon of stability and holy order.
So while Peter is worried about the private witness in the living room, Paul is worried about the public witness of the whole congregation in the sanctuary.
Exactly.
What was this specific crisis in Ephesus that prompted him to write about clothing?
The crisis was socioeconomic. The early church was a radical sociological experiment.
Yeah.
It was one of the only places in the ancient world where ultra-wealthy patricians and destitute slaves gathered in the same room, drank from the same cup, and called each other brother and sister.
Which was unheard of.
Completely unheard of. But human nature being what it is, that equality was constantly under threat. Paul is addressing a specific issue where certain wealthy ladies in the congregation were wearing incredibly ostentatious, obscenely expensive outfits right into the middle of the worship service.
This wasn't just wearing your Sunday best, right?
No.
This was wearing the equivalent of a multi-million-dollar couture gown and a safe full of diamonds to a gathering where the person sitting next to you might not know where their next meal is coming from.
Precisely. And this created two massive problems. First, it completely shattered the internal unity of the church.
I can imagine.
It created immediate, visceral social tension and class division. It turned the sacred worship of a crucified carpenter into a competitive status competition.
Yeah.
The wealthy were using the church gathering as a runway to flex their economic superiority.
Which would deeply shame and alienate the poor believers.
Completely.
It violates the very core of the gospel, which levels the ground at the foot of the cross.
Right.
So what was the second problem?
The second problem was the external reputation of the church. In Greco-Roman society, the highest moral philosophers, like the Stoics, the Platonists, they actually despised ostentatious dress.
Really?
Yeah, they often associated extreme vanity and luxury with unchastity, moral corruption, or a complete lack of that virtue we discussed earlier, sophrosun, sound mind.
Right.
So if non-believing moral observers looked at the Christian gathering and saw it turning into a vanity fair for the ultra-rich, it completely destroyed the church's reputation as a holy, serious, morally rigorous community.
They would just look like everyone else.
Exactly. Paul desperately wants the church's worship to be harmonious internally and its reputation to be unimpeachable externally.
Okay, so to really visualize the inner beauty these apostles wanted, we have to look at the specific exterior trends they were trying to ban.
Let's do it.
We need to take a walk down these ancient runways. What exactly were these women wearing that caused Peter and Paul to hit the brakes so hard?
Well, both apostles are remarkably consistent. They both list three highly specific categories of improper, ostentatious adornment.
Okay.
Let's break them down historically because visually they are quite striking and honestly bizarre to our modern sensibilities.
I can't wait.
The first category is braided hair. The Greek terms are emplox trishan in Peter's letter and plegma in Paul's.
Now wait. When a modern reader sees braided hair,
Yeah.
they think of a simple French braid or maybe putting your hair in pigtails.
Right.
It sounds like a practical way to keep hair out of your face while you work. Why in the world would an apostle ban a basic braid?
Because it wasn't a basic braid. The Greek terms they used were technical terms for incredibly elaborate, unusually high architectural towers of hair.
Towers.
Yes. During the Flavian and Trajanic periods in Rome, the hairstyles for wealthy women became absurdly massive. These were towering structures of curls and braids that were sometimes literally held up by hidden wire cages or hardened with early forms of lacquer.
Wire and lacquer in the first century.
Yes. And it was a massive display of wealth because constructing these hair towers required immense amounts of leisure time. A woman couldn't do it herself.
Obviously.
She required the labor of an ornatrix, which was a specially trained slave dedicated solely to hairdressing. They would use curling irons heated in ashes.
Wow.
And it gets wilder. The hair was often interwoven with heavy chains of gold, strings of pearls, and countless gold spangles that almost entirely hid the natural hair. These spangles would glitter and tinkle with every movement of the head.
That is fascinating. It reminds me of the avant-garde outfits you see at the Met Gala today, where celebrities wear dresses so massive or structurally absurd that they literally cannot sit down.
Exactly.
Or they need 3 handlers just to walk up the stairs. It is fashion that aggressively communicates, I do not have to do manual labor, and I have people to manage my body for me.
That is the exact psychological equivalent. The source material highlights an amazing historical account from the ancient geographer Strabo.
What did he say?
He describes wealthy people who beautified their appearance with these massive hair structures. And he notes that they walked very carefully, rarely touching one another, for fear that the adornment of their hair may not remain intact.
That is almost comical.
Okay.
But it is so deeply revealing. They are literally immobilized by their own vanity.
They really are.
They are so obsessed with their cosmos, their outward arrangement, that they cannot function as humans. They can't hug a friend in grief. They can't bend down to serve a neighbor. They can't even bow their heads in humble prayer during the church service because they are balancing a wire cage of gold on their heads.
It's absurd.
It is the absolute literal opposite of Hesychios, a gentle and quiet spirit. It is an aesthetic that is screaming for attention and demanding accommodation.
Exactly. And that leads directly to the second category they both reject.
Yeah.
The wearing of gold and pearls.
Okay.
Now, the Roman Empire was awash in wealth for the upper classes. It was not uncommon to find wealthy patrician women absolutely loaded with all kinds of heavy jewelry.
Like what?
Necklaces, massive earrings, armbands, bracelets, anklets. One historian, U.O. Paoli, noted that many of them walked the streets looking like ambulatory jewelry shops.
Walking jewelry shops. That is quite the image.
Yes. Pearls, in particular, were incredibly precious status symbols in antiquity. They were far more rare and valuable than they are today because they had to be naturally harvested by divers.
Right. No cultured pearls back then.
Exactly, often imported from the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean. They were the ultimate flex of concentrated wealth.
Wow.
Peter and Paul look at this competitive display of extreme wealth and declare it fundamentally incompatible with the humble, cruciform spirit of Christianity.
And what is the third category?
Costly attire. In 1 Timothy, the Greek phrase is hematismos polutele. The word hematismos just refers to an outer garment or cloak.
Okay.
But Paul modifies it with the adjective polutele, which means oppressively expensive, rare, luxurious, or sumptuous.
Not just a nice coat.
No, this wasn't just wearing a clean, well-made tunic. This was wearing garments dyed in Tyrian purple, or woven with gold thread, or made of imported silk.
The really expensive stuff.
Yeah, these garments were specifically designed and priced to establish sharp social distinctions, to visually prove that the wearer was fundamentally above the common people sitting next to them in the pews.
Okay, let me pause here and ask a vital clarifying question. Because I know you, the listener, are thinking about your own closet right now.
It's a natural reaction.
Is taking care of your hair a sin? Is wearing a nice dress or a tailored suit a violation of biblical doctrine? Like, are Peter and Paul saying the ideal Christian aesthetic is to wear burlap potato sacks, shave our heads, and look as miserable and unkempt as possible?
Absolutely not. And the theological source material is very clear on this distinction. Remember the noun we defined earlier, cosmos?
Right. Arrangement.
It means order and arrangement. There is nothing intrinsically wrong with adorning oneself or seeking order. In fact, clothing is a basic, God-given human need. What is being rejected here is not clothing, neatness, or basic aesthetics. What is rejected is ostentatious, luxurious dress that actively conflicts with Christian values of humility, charity, and unity. The apostles are opposing a value system of pride, not the basic human need for apparel.
Okay, so if it is about the value system of pride versus the basic need for apparel, that brings us to what I call the economy argument.
Yes.
I've heard people try to find a loophole here. They say, well, Paul is specifically against expensive gold and costly pearls. So if I go to a fast fashion discount store and buy a bunch of cheap fake gold chains or inexpensive plastic pearls, then I'm totally fine, right? Because I didn't spend a lot of money, it wasn't costly.
I've heard that too.
Is Paul just giving us financial advice here? Is he just telling us to be frugal shoppers?
The source material anticipates this exact argument and systematically refutes it. The theological issue isn't just the price tag on the receipt, it's the category and function of the item.
Break that down.
Let's break down the logic. Clothing is a basic human need. We must wear it to survive the elements and for basic decency. Because it is a need, Paul has to distinguish between appropriate clothing and inappropriate, oppressively expensive clothing.
Right.
But ornamental jewelry is not a basic human need.
Right. You don't need a gold necklace to survive a winter storm. You don't need pearls to be decent in public.
Exactly. So notice that Paul doesn't offer a cheap alternative to gold and pearls. He doesn't say, don't wear real gold, wear brass instead.
That's a good point.
Why? Because the very nature, the historical origin, and the social function of ornamental jewelry was to establish social distinction, to foster pride, and to draw attention to oneself.
If you buy a knockoff Rolex, it doesn't mean you have suddenly abandoned the desire for status.
No.
It just means you desire the status but lack the funds for the real thing. The desire is identical.
That is a brilliant modern equivalent. Paul isn't saying find cheaper ways to look ostentatious. He is rejecting the entire category of ornamental jewelry as inherently inappropriate for expressing Christian modesty and decency.
Wow.
The source material argues there is no implicit distinction in these texts between different types of jewelry based on cost. It's the function and symbolism of the adornment itself that is incompatible with the humble, unified spirit of the church.
Because it triggers that governor.
Right. The architecture of the soul, governed by eidos, modesty, simply doesn't require that kind of external scaffolding.
So it isn't about checking the receipt. It is about checking the motive and the function. If the item's historical, practical purpose is to elevate you above others or demand attention, it violates the governor of eidos.
Exactly.
Now, we have to ask, is this a hard and fast rule, or just a strong culturally conditioned suggestion? To really understand how binding the early church believed this was, we have to look closely at the grammar.
Yes, grammar is key here.
Because some modern scholars look at these verses and try to soften them. They use what we might call the relative comparison defense, or the not, but defense.
Yes, this is a very common grammatical debate.
The argument goes like this. They claim the Greek text should be read more as a relative comparison. Like, your beauty should not so much come from the outside, but rather it should come from the inside.
Right.
It softens the blow. It makes it sound like wearing massive amounts of outside jewelry is perfectly fine as long as your inside heart is relatively more beautiful. How does the source material handle this?
The source material provides a strict, systematic grammatical analysis of the Greek that completely dismantles that softened interpretation.
Really?
The Greek phrase used by both Peter and Paul here is ou, alla, which translates directly to not but.
So why can't out, Allah, mean not so much? But rather, why can't it be a sliding scale?
Because of the grammatical mood of the sentence. In Greek grammar, when the negative particle ou, meaning no or not, is denying a phrase that is in the imperative mood meaning, it is a direct command, the following alla meaning, but introduces a contrasting subject in an absolute, mutually exclusive sense.
Okay, I think I'm tracking.
It literally and forcefully translates to not this, but on the contrary, that.
So it is entirely binary. It is a zero-sum game.
Completely binary. The author of the source material rigorously checked the use of this specific grammatical formula, the negative particle, with present imperatives throughout the entire New Testament. And the conclusion is stark. There is not a single case in the New Testament in which this phrase means not so much as.
Wow.
It is always, without exception, a firm, absolute apostolic prohibition. Peter and Paul are definitively rejecting one value system, the external ostentation, to actively command and promote a completely different value system. They are mutually exclusive.
Okay, here's another major objection, and we touched on this briefly before. We mentioned that Roman moral philosophers, the Stoics and others, also didn't like flashy jewelry or towering hair.
Right.
So a critic might say, look, Peter and Paul weren't getting a divine revelation here. They were just copying the secular conservative philosophers of their day. They were just saying, hey, Christians, let's dress like the respectable Romans so we don't cause trouble and get persecuted.
I've read that critique.
And if that's true, then this is just an outdated cultural accommodation that has zero bearing on how a Christian should dress in the modern world.
It is absolutely true that Greek and Roman writers gave similar advice regarding modesty to ladies in their society. And from an apologetic standpoint, that provided a very helpful point of connection.
Yeah.
It meant the Christians were adopting a standard that the highest moral minds of the empire could respect. But, and this is a massive theological opinioning, but the secular philosophers did not provide the source, the authority, or the ultimate values for the apostles' commands. Peter explicitly tells us the source of his prohibition, and he bypasses Roman philosophy completely.
Where does he anchor it?
He anchors it deep in the Old Testament. He points directly to the holy women of the past. Specifically, biblical scholars note he is almost certainly referencing the prophetic tradition, like Isaiah chapter 3.
What happens in Isaiah 3?
In Isaiah 3, God delivers a blistering prophetic critique of the arrogant daughters of Zion who paraded around with clinking ankle bracelets, elaborate headbands, and excessive jewelry, ignoring the poor and the impending judgment.
Wow, so it goes way back.
Yes. Peter is proving that this standard of modesty is deeply rooted in biblical history and divine revelation, not just first-century Roman trends. What was proper for the holy women of ancient Israel is still the standard for the Christian believer.
So it completely transcends the Roman culture because it is rooted in the historical narrative of God's people.
Exactly. And the ultimate theological reason Peter gives isn't about cultural conformity, it is about the principle of imitatio Dei, the imitation of God.
Oh, I like that.
Peter says this inner beauty, this gentle and quiet spirit, is of great worth in God's sight. God values the spiritual over the material. As the source material beautifully and provocatively puts it, God doesn't wear jewelry.
Oh, wow.
The creator of the universe doesn't value superficial, ephemeral displays of created wealth. When believers reject ostentation, they aren't just following a rule. They are actively aligning their aesthetic tastes with God's value system. They are training their hearts to value what God values.
God doesn't wear jewelry. I have to stop and highlight that. That is such a simple paradigm-shifting thought. It reorients the whole discussion. We are ultimately trying to reflect the image of a God who values a pure heart, not a God who is impressed by a gold watch or a designer label.
Perfectly said.
So this brings us to the great exchange. If the jewelry, the luxury labels, and the wire-laced hair have to go, what is the believer supposed to put on instead? You can't just be spiritually naked. We need a new wardrobe.
We do.
Let's look at Peter's wardrobe first. What is the Christian supposed to wear?
Peter tells believers to adorn the hidden person of the heart. Now, we have to be very careful with our theology here. He is not promoting a classic Greek dualism where the physical body is inherently bad and the invisible spirit is inherently good.
Right, God made the body.
Exactly. In biblical theology, God created the physical body and it is good. The hidden person refers to the whole human being as it is directed from within, from the core of believing thoughts, convictions, and desires.
So is your true self the command center of your identity?
Right. And Peter says this command center must express itself through the imperishable jewel of a gentle and quiet spirit. Remember our deep dive into preos and hesukios?
Yes, the bridled strength and tranquility.
Exactly. This new wardrobe is an outfit of inner tranquility, reliance on God, and an absence of pride. It is specifically called an imperishable jewel to contrast it with physical gold.
Because physical gold degrades.
Physical gold can be stolen, it can be lost, it corrodes over time, its market value fluctuates. But this spiritual disposition has eternal permanence. Its value never depreciates.
I think about the contrast between these two wardrobes in a modern setting. It is the difference between someone who walks into a crowded room and literally demands attention with their exterior second. Maybe their outfit is incredibly loud, or they are covered in massive luxury logos, visually shouting at you to acknowledge their wealth and status.
Yeah, we've all seen that.
Contrast that with the person who walks into the room, and they are so deeply secure, so thoroughly rooted in their peace with God, that their mere presence brings a calm to the atmosphere.
Yeah.
They don't need your validation. They don't need your envy, because they already have the validation of the Creator. That deep, unshakable security is the imperishable jewel.
That is exactly the contrast Peter is drawing. It is a life rooted in reliance on God versus a life exhausted by the demands of self-display.
It sounds so much more freeing, honestly.
It is. Now let's look at Paul's wardrobe. Paul also provides a positive command to replace the negative prohibitions. For women who profess religion, the specific Greek word he uses is theosobeia, which means a deep, active reverence for God. Their primary adornment must be good works.
Good works is an outfit. That is incredibly practical.
Yes. Paul argues that true Christianity is meant to beautify lives, not just internally, but externally through action. If you claim to have theosobeia, reverence for God, you must substantiate that theological confession with your tangible action.
That makes total sense.
Think about the economics of this. Instead of spending immense financial resources and hundreds of hours of leisure time on ephemeral luxury, like the time and money spent building a wire hair tower or acquiring pearls, believers are called to take those exact same resources and adorn themselves by serving others.
Wow.
True beauty, for Paul, is visible in acts of charity, kindness, sacrifice, and service to the community.
This theology is so intensely practical and challenging. It forces us to ask where our resources are actually going.
It really does.
How do we take these ancient Greek words, these Roman contexts of hair towers and tunics, and apply them to our modern lives? This brings us to the synthesis of our deep dive. The source material outlines several major, distinct takeaways from these texts.
10 of them, right?
Exactly. We are going to weave through these 10 principles now, bridging the abstract theology to everyday Christian life. Let's look at the first major implication.
So the foundational takeaway is that true beauty is internal. The theology here is that the hidden person of the heart is what God actually sees, evaluates, and values.
Right.
The practical application of this is that a believer must check their heart before they check the mirror. We live in an incredibly image-obsessed culture, a culture dominated by screens and visual curation.
Oh, absolutely.
But a Christian must prioritize their spiritual health, their moral purity, hagnos, and their inner tranquility over their physical curation. Your character is your true aesthetic.
That flows right into the second implication, reverence over trend. The theology is that our behavior, our katastal, must arise out of a deep reverence and commitment to the Lord, not a fear of societal standards or a desperation to fit in.
It's all about who you revere.
Think about how this applies today. When you were choosing an outfit or deciding on a personal style or curating your Instagram feed, ask yourself, does this reflect my peaceful commitment to God, or does this reflect my desperate, exhausting desire for social validation? Are you dressing to appease the algorithm or to reflect the peace of Christ?
That is a piercing question. And it leads to a third, highly communal takeaway, rejecting social division. The theology from Paul's context in Ephesus is that ostentatious dress was specifically designed to separate the rich from the poor and establish a hierarchy of superiority.
Which destroys the church.
It does. So the application for us today is that the church gathering must be a level playing field. You should never dress to flex your wealth or to intentionally make others feel economically inferior, especially in a worship setting. Our physical presence should communicate unity, humility, and equality in Christ, not economic hierarchy.
Let's talk about the fourth implication, which deals with that fascinating word, eidos. Modesty as an internal boundary. The theology here rests on that self-respect, that holy sense of shame that acts as an engine governor keeping you from excess.
Yes, the governor.
The application is realizing that modesty isn't just about measuring hemlines or policing other people's bodies. True biblical modesty is a dignified internal restraint. It is a boundary you set for yourself in how you speak, how you spend your money, and how you present yourself online. It is the absolute refusal to commodify yourself for cheap attention.
Which brings us to the fifth point. The quiet spirit is strength, not weakness. The theology of Hesupios is tranquility amidst conflict, an absence of violence based entirely on trusting God to vindicate you.
I love this one.
The application is that in our current cultural moment, which is loud, aggressive, polarized, and constantly outraged, you don't always need to have the last word. You don't need to make the flashiest entrance or win the argument on social media. There is profound magnetic power in peacefulness. A quiet spirit isn't a silenced, defeated spirit. It is a perfectly secure spirit.
A quiet spirit is a secure spirit. That is powerful. Let's move to the sixth implication, leaning on Paul's positive command.
Yeah.
Actions are your best accessories.
Yes.
The theology from Paul is that good works validate the claim of being religious. If you profess reverence for God, you have to back it up in reality. The application is to literally wear your faith. Serve a neighbor, volunteer your time, give generously to those in need.
Put those resources to use.
Exactly. Let your kindness, your patience, and your charity be the absolute first thing people notice about you, not the luxury brand of your shoes or the car you drove up in.
And if we're talking about resources, we must address the seventh takeaway, financial stewardship. The theology stems directly from the rejection of costly attire, the hamatismos polutele. The biblical text explicitly critiques oppressively expensive luxury. The modern application is a serious call to reevaluate our budgets. If you are about to purchase an unnecessary, ostentatious luxury item, the text forces you to ask, could that money be redirected to a kingdom cause? Could it feed someone? Does hoarding luxury items align with the humble, self-sacrificial spirit of the gospel?
That is a hard pill to swallow in a consumer capitalist society. But it aligns perfectly with the eighth implication, the imitation of God. The theology is that believers are called to develop aesthetic tastes that correspond to God's tastes. God considers the gentle spirit precious.
God doesn't wear jewelry.
Exactly. The application is simple but lifelong. Value what God values. We should be spending significantly more time, energy, and resources cultivating a gentle, pure spirit than we spend cultivating a fashion aesthetic, a skincare routine, or a personal brand.
The ninth implication brings us back to the corporate gathering, harmony and worship. The theology of 1 Timothy is that Paul desperately wanted to avoid social disruptions and reputational damage in the local church.
It's all about unity.
Right. The application is being highly mindful of your impact on the gathered body. Ensure that your presence, your demeanor, your katastole, and your appearance at a church service are not a distraction that pulls others' focus away from God. Worship is entirely about elevating Christ. It is never a platform for elevating ourselves.
And finally, the 10th takeaway, drawing from Peter's advice to the vulnerable wives, the power of silent witness. The theology involves believers winning over their unbelieving family members without a single word, purely through their pure, reverent behavior.
This is so relevant today.
It is. The application is huge for us today. You don't always need an aggressive, argumentative verbal debate to share the gospel. In fact, sometimes words just build walls. Sometimes a consistent, pure, peaceful, and gentle life is your absolute strongest apologetic to your non-believing family, friends, and coworkers. Your life speaks volumes before you ever open your mouth.
Those are profound, intensely practical implications drawn directly from the careful exegesis of the text. It takes these ancient concepts of Roman hair towers, Greek engine governors, and the socioeconomics of the pearl trade, and brings them right into our modern closets, our bank accounts, and our relationships.
It really does. It completely demolishes the idea that our personal style is just a neutral, secular playground.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Okay.
We started by asking what your physical outfit says about your soul, but let's take it a step further into the spiritual reality. If our clothes are a visible language speaking on our behalf, what is our spiritual wardrobe telling the world before we even say a word? Think about the sheer amount of time, the effort, the anxiety, and the money we currently spend on curating our physical aesthetic for the public eye. What if we took every ounce of that energy and instead poured it into dressing our souls in good works and gentleness? What would happen to our local communities, to our churches, to our families, if we became as obsessed with moral purity and inner tranquility as we currently are with our outward appearance?
That is the ultimate challenge to walk away with. It truly flips the mirror from the outside to the inside. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the theology of personal adornment. We hope this rigorous breakdown of the original text has given you a fresh perspective, challenged your assumptions, and provided the tools to keep exploring the richness of these scriptures on your own. Until next time, keep diving deep.